"Granddaughter, why don't you show Grandpa what you got there?" asked Harold to his granddaughter. It was the old man's anniversary. He was 75 years old, and everything would have been fine. Except the old man's hearing was completely lost. Harold was very upset. He understood that the years of his youth were long gone, but he wanted to hear the sound of the wind and birds singing just one more time. He had many sounds in his memories, and the songs they sang in the village. The voice of the girl he loved, Margaret. Oh, how she sang. What love they had. He played the guitar and she would sing live without a microphone. What a voice. Margaret. Unfortunately, Margaret did not become Harold's wife. She listened to her father and married another man and went to another town. And he spitefully married her friend Sandra. Sandra was a grouchy one. She couldn't forgive him for having an affair with Margaret, and all her life she felt he loved her, so she grumbled. But the worst thing was that Harold was already a grandfather, but he would never hear his granddaughter's voice. She was just beginning to speak, small, sweet, saying something still and audible, and the old man couldn't hear any of it. That's what hurt. In spite of his hearing loss, he could talk. Harold had worked all his life in a steel mill. The noise level there was excessive. Now there were safety standards and regulations. Workers are given headphones. Back then, no one thought about people. "Is it noisy? Is it?" "Oh, what delicate ears you have," they would say to the complainer. "You don't like it? Go away. Quit. Go look for a quieter job." Harold didn't complain. He worked quietly. He came to his homeland, his village, on weekends. There were discos on weekends, a guitar, and Margaret. Life was good. But Margaret's parents didn't want her to marry a common laborer. They persuaded her to marry a famous artist. He's an acquaintance of the family. He's been in love with her for a long time. One day Harold came for a weekend, but Margaret was gone. He looked everywhere, and Sandra told him that Margaret wasn't there. She'd gone to another town with a rich fiancé. That's when Harold felt a noise in his ears for the first time. Thought it was excitement. Maybe his blood pressure went up. Then it went away. Then there were other times, but they went away. But 3 years ago, Harold woke up in the morning and lost his hearing completely. He'd been to doctors, even healers. It turned out to be a consequence of working in a factory. Melissa was born when he had already been deaf for a year. Too bad Sandra hadn't seen him like that. She would have been glad. Grumble all you want, even at full voice. You can call him names, he won't hear you. Sandra had been dead a long time. Harold had only been retired for 5 years. They had a big fight back then. He started a new life of freedom. He wanted to travel the country, maybe see the world. She was putting all her money in a jar. Harold didn't count how much she had, but she had a lot of money saved up over her life. She could have bought a car, maybe even 2. But Sandra insisted. "No," she said. "We'll live like before." And then he said to her, "Let's get a divorce. You live your life the way you used to, and I'll go abroad. All my life I dreamed of going there, but give me half the money you've saved," the old man asked. He thought that it was only fair because he had been giving his wife all his wages all his life. He did not leave anything for himself. So he was entitled to at least half. And Sandra, how she shouted, how angry she got. "What are you up to? My son is studying, getting married, and the old man wanted money for a trip." Harold himself did not know that his son was getting married. No one told him, didn't introduce him to the bride. It hurt the old man's heart. So when he brought in money, he was respected. But when he retired, that was it. He wasn't needed. It wouldn't have been surprising if he hadn't been invited to the wedding. But if the son wanted to get married, let him get married. And what's the problem? Let him earn his own money for the wedding. When he married Sandra, He didn't ask his parents for anything. That's what our son did right, not to introduce you to his bride. How can I introduce you to anyone? You are reasoning according to forgotten traditions. How can he earn his own money if he's studying? You see, he's a student, his wife began to yell at Harold. Well, let him not marry. Let him wait until he learns and goes to work. Have you met his bride-to-be? Asked Harold. Yes, I have, replied Sandra sarcastically. It was a shame for Harold. Although he never drank alcohol, that time he went to a bar and got drunk out of grief. He didn't even remember how he got home, and Sandra decided to teach him a lesson. Her friends advised her that this was supposed to be a cure for drunkenness. At about 6 o'clock in the morning, she put a big pan on her husband's head and then hit it with a rolling pin. It rumbled like an earthquake. Harold thought he was going to lose his mind. After that, his hearing became much, much worse. Of course, he never told the doctors about it. And after that, Harold stopped talking to Sandra. Then she got cancer and died very quickly. She never had time to go to her son's wedding. Well, the money she had saved, Harold said, she still managed to take with her to the grave. Not literally, of course. That money was spent on her funeral. Some didn't go to her son for the wedding or to Harold for the trip. And the son ended up breaking up with the bride anyway. Wow, Harold thought. What fate. Almost like mine. Still, in some ways, children repeat the fate of their parents. He couldn't marry Margaret either. But the story's a little different. His son's fiancée didn't want to marry him herself. Harold's son broke up with that girl, and soon Rebecca showed up at their house. Nice girl, well-mannered, and respected Harold. She helped out around the house with everything, and she didn't ask for a rich wedding. She even made her own wedding dress. Rebecca, nice, quiet. But Harold saw his son suffer. He didn't like Rebecca, and that made Harold nervous every day, sorry for his son and his bride, and his hearing got worse and worse. A week before the birth, Rebecca suddenly turned to him in the kitchen and said, "Don't worry so much. I know everything. I know your son doesn't love me." "You mean, how do you know?" the old man wondered. "She calls him almost every day, and if I answer, she doesn't say anything. She seems to be the same girl he was going to marry before me, and I have nowhere else to go. I'm having a baby. What am I going to do? I don't know why he asked me to marry him," Rebecca said sadly. He only guessed that his son was pining for his old girlfriend, but he had no idea that he was cheating on his wife. He had never cheated on his Sandra. Yes, he longed for Margaret, but he took responsibility for his choices. No matter how he lived with Sandra, there were times when he even loved her, and at times he wondered if he can get on with Margaret. Maybe it was a good thing that it all worked out that way. And then there's this mess. I'll have to talk to my son while Rebecca's in the maternity ward. He could not recover from the news for a long time. And he wanted to talk right away, but he could not. A week later, Rebecca went into the maternity hospital. She never came back from there. She died in childbirth. It was as if she was superfluous in this strange love story. Harold cried like a baby when he found out, as if he'd buried his own daughter. He loved Rebecca, and the next day he went completely deaf. And the only joy the old man had left was his granddaughter. His son named her Melissa. It didn't take long for Carl to mourn, and he married a second time when the baby was 6 months old. With an ex-girlfriend, of course. Who else would he marry? "Oh, I was a fool. Why didn't I marry him right away?" she told Harold. And he had already figured something out. If someone was next to him and didn't speak quickly, he had a good guess at what he was talking about. "So it's fate," Harold replied. He didn't like his son's chosen one, and he didn't like those heart-to-heart talks, and she wanted to talk to him all the time. I guess she wanted to show him that they were like a real family. Oh, what fate. Stupid, not fate. If I'd have agreed, he wouldn't have married any Rebecca, said the girl. I wouldn't have had Rebecca. I wouldn't have had a granddaughter, said Harold, and squinted. He wondered how the stepmother felt about the girl. He could not understand the behavior of his son's new wife. When his son is at home, she plays with the girl, even kisses her. But when he is at work, she does not approach her. She only changes her clothes before he comes home, washes her up, and everything's fine as if... But the old man saw through it all. No, think about it. What about Melissa? You're all Melissa, Melissa. And by the way, I can have a baby too. But your son doesn't want to, said the girl. Then she smiled so broadly and added, he doesn't want me to spoil my figure. He said, why do you want to have a baby? Here, there's a baby right here. She won't even know if you're her mother or someone else. Harold was shocked. How could that be? What is this mess? He just had to wait until Melissa was older. Then he would tell her all about her real mother, about Rebecca, who truly loved her. She loved her so much that she even put up with her husband's mistress for her. Time passed. Melissa grew, and the old man got in the way more and more. So one day the son decided to move out. That's enough, he said. It's time to start my own family. So why don't you leave Melissa with me? She's 3 years old now, Harold asked. Come on, Dad, you can't hear anything. And she can't really talk. She says something, and sometimes we don't understand it. What if she cries at night? You'll be asleep, my son objected. Maybe he was right. It was with great sadness that Grandpa let his granddaughter go. The old man was left alone and constantly worried about Melissa. How was she doing with her stepmother? If his son's wife had allowed herself to ignore the child in his absence, she would not have allowed herself any more serious things at home. And her granddaughter is small. Oh my God! And her granddaughter is small and still talks badly, and there is no one to complain. The big house was empty all at once. Harold spent the whole day going from corner to corner, from room to room. He didn't know what to do. And the deafness. Can't even watch TV. And so bored was he of late that he began to think gloomy thoughts. Strangely enough, it wasn't Margaret he was pining for. He really missed Sandra. After all, they had lived together so many years, all their lives. They had a son and a granddaughter now. How was his Margaret's life? Harold didn't even know Margaret. What? Margaret was a mirage, a dream that never came true. He didn't even know if she was alive or not. With those thoughts in mind, Harold thought he would not live to see his 75th birthday. However, he did. The son and daughter-in-law came and moved the granddaughter in. They stand at the door, whisper something, and give the girl a box. They nudge her as if to go and give her a present. Melissa, granddaughter, show Grandpa what you have there. The old man held out his hands to his granddaughter and took the box. When the grandfather opened it, he didn't understand what was in it. There's some things in the box, a tube, and some kind of snail. So the son came over, took the box, adjusted something, and put it on the old man's ear. And he tucked the tube in his ear. Hear that, Dad? Can you hear that? Asked Carl. Keep your voice down. There's no need to shout in my ear, said Harold. It was a hearing aid. They tuned it up a little more, turned down the volume, and started getting ready for dinner, making a fuss. Everyone was happy that the hearing aid fit. It turned out that Melissa had been talking for a long time, not with such complicated phrases and words yet, but she could tell everything properly. The old man was relieved. Well then, everything is all right. After supper, the son and his wife went outside for some fresh air, and Melissa runs up to Grandpa and whispers in Grandpa's ear, right into his hearing aid. Grandpa, Grandpa. And I know that Monica, Daddy's wife, is not my birth mother. What are you saying? Who told you that? Asked Grandpa, and he is worried. That's what she said. She also said that she and Daddy were going to have a baby of their own, and she was going to give me to an orphanage. Just don't tell anyone, Grandpa. She'll kill me, the granddaughter whispered. "Of course, sweetheart. I won't say anything to anyone," said Grandpa, while he was panicking in his heart. What to do? A son and his wife came into the house. "What are you whispering about?" asked Monica, and she looked up with an angry look. "Dad, we have another surprise for you." "Do you hear good?" his son asked. All right, the old man said, and he thought to himself that he'd better not have heard what his granddaughter had told him. "And we're going to have a new addition to the family. We're expecting a baby. You'll have a second grandchild," Carl said. "Are you excited?" "Oh, I'm very glad." Grandpa tried to smile, and then added, "Would Melissa be better off staying with me for a while then?" "Come on, we can handle it. Everybody does." "Are we any worse?" said Monica, and then she suddenly changed her face and shouted, "Melissa, what's wrong with you?" Harold turned around and saw his granddaughter lying on the couch with her arms out to her sides and not breathing. Everyone ran in, called an ambulance, and the girl was taken away. Now that he had his hearing aid, the old man could talk on the phone. He called the hospital every 15 minutes. He was already being scolded there, but he still found out about his granddaughter's condition. "We did everything we could, but it was anaphylactic shock. The girl died," the grandfather was told, and even told the time of death. The old man almost dropped the phone. It couldn't be. It wasn't true. He couldn't believe it. Just now she was alive, especially after what the grandfather had said. So that's what it's all about. A frantic hunch flashed through Harold's mind. That bastard poisoned the baby, put something in her food in my house to divert suspicion from herself. Already allergies happened at Grandpa's anniversary party. What else could a child get? Of course, this was Monica's way of getting rid of her unneeded stepdaughter. "Daddy, don't be crazy. What are you talking about? Can't you see I don't have time for your tricks right now? My wife loved Melissa like her own daughter," the son shouted at his father. Carl became seriously angry. It was the first time he had ever allowed himself to talk to his father like that. The old man left. When Harold arrived at the funeral, the casket was already closed. The farewell had taken place earlier, and here at the cemetery they decided not to open the coffin, so as not to torment themselves with the sight of a dead child. Grandfather went to the small lid of the little coffin. He put his arms around it and pressed his cheek against it. The old man pretended to cry and bid farewell to his granddaughter, while he himself listened inside the coffin. "Well, granddaughter, come on, girl. This is our last chance. At least breathe or sneeze," the old man literally begged in a whisper. He pressed against the coffin with his new hearing aid. The volume was turned up to maximum. Hope was fading by the second. He should have stepped away from the coffin by now. And now his granddaughter, his Melissa, would be buried. "Dad, come on, it's time," said the son, and touched Grandpa's shoulder. At that very second, Harold heard a sigh. "She's alive. Open the coffin now," the old man shouted. "Dad, stop it!" Carl yelled at him, and was suddenly silent. He looked at the woman. It was his wife. For some reason, she was not comforting the old man, or at least not him, her husband. She was running through the cemetery despite her pregnancy. The coffin was opened. Melissa was alive. The girl was sent back to the hospital. Monica was caught. She admitted that she had given the baby some medicine that had put her in a coma, but that they hadn't had time to bury her because the ceremony had taken too long. She also admitted that the child she was expecting was not Carl's. Such are the stories. Harold, his son, and granddaughter lived together as a threesome, and soon his hearing returned. It was as if he'd been missing on purpose to get a hearing aid. Thanks to him, he could hear his granddaughter's breathing.